Hello, I'm John Kinzer here with Faith, Culture, and Society. This is Series 3, Session 1, and with these sessions, we begin looking at the American presidents. Not all of them, but especially those that you see the fingerprint of God in their life. You see how they were used by God, how they inspire us even today with what they were able to accomplish, what God did through them. So this first president is George Washington. And Richard Henry Lee said when Washington died in 1799, he said at the funeral, he said, Washington was first in war, first in peace, and first in the hearts of his countrymen. And I would have to say that such a true statement. People loved George Washington. Richard Wilbur, a historian, said Washington was without an equal. He was unquestionably the greatest man the world has produced in the last 1,000 years. Well, I don't know if that's exactly true, but he was a great, great man. One man in particular had Washington a hero as he grew up. He had very few books, but he did have a Bible. He had Aesop's Fables. He had The Life of Washington by Parson Weems. And he had John Bunyan's Pilgrim's Progress. He later said that his goal was to be revered by people of America and to be like Washington. The man who emulated Washington was Abraham Lincoln. Well, how did people so love and respect this man? And I would have to say I've studied a lot about George Washington. I've read a number of books. I would have to say his character was the determining thing about his, the love and respect that people had. So when we think of character, we talked about it earlier in our series, back in Series 1. Character is a mark made on the heart in the life of a person by pressing, stamping, cutting, or engraving. It's a mark made on the heart. So to gain character, you have to go through this process of being cut. It's difficult. It's hard. It's hard to be stamped. It's not pleasant. In fact, you have to go through the difficulties. You have to go through the suffering, that furnace of trials. Character is not made in ease, in an easy situation. Character is made in a fiery furnace. It's when your strength, your patience, your faith is put to the test. And Washington went through that character formation in early life. All through his early years, I would say even up to his presidency. He became president in 1789. All the way up for 57 years, he was tested. He was strengthened through trials and difficulties. First, he was the commander-in-chief of the American Army. Boy, that was a test. Being outnumbered and not having the supplies you need, and having to lead a ragtag outfit of men, and trying to go up against the strongest army in the world at the time, at least in Europe at that time. He was also president of the Constitutional Convention, this amazing document of freedom resulting, and the convention there resulting in the U.S. Constitution. He was also the first president under that Constitution. Today, the United States is still under that Constitution. It has 27 amendments that have been added to it, but it's the same Constitution. It's the same document of liberty. He served as president for 2 terms. A president can serve for 4 years in a term, and he served for 2, and then he voluntarily stepped down. He said, 2 terms is enough. I think he was right. So what shaped Washington? Well, his father died when he was just 11 years old, and his mother raised him. Mary Washington trained him, and she soon had him memorizing a little booklet of 113 rules called the Rules of Civility. And these were just accepted rules and standards of conduct. And Washington memorized them. Things like not tapping your foot when you're talking to a person, not pointing with your finger at, you restrain yourself, you govern yourself. And these rules did that in his life. And then the events prepared him and prepared his endurance for the things that came ahead. In 1753, when he was 21 years old, in 1753, he was selected to carry a message into the wilderness to a French fort and tell them to be gone. They were on the colony of Virginia's land, and they needed to get out of there. And so that was a big task. The next year, he returned to that area. 1754, he was 22, and he commanded 300 men and moved on that fort, went into a battle, and lost the battle. He unwisely selected a poor site for his Fort Necessity. The French and Indians surrounded the Virginia troops, and Washington lost 100 of his men killed and ended up surrendering to the French and Indians. This was the first time a British unit surrendered to anyone in the New World. So this was humiliating for Washington. And he lost 100 men because of his poor choice of a fort. Well, this was disgraceful, and it was due to a poor judgment on his part. But one thing you see about George Washington, he learns from every mistake he made. He didn't repeat mistakes. He learned from them. And he learned you don't put a fort in the bottom of a valley and where they can easily be surrounded by French and Indians. So he's entirely self-trained. He didn't go to school. He never went to formal classes. He never went to college. He had no military training. Everything he learned on his own. And he made a lot of mistakes, but he learned. And he became a good commander later in his life. Now, the thing about Washington was, and I'm going to put this up here because it's such a powerful thing, he was an exceptional leader. And his leadership ability was really the thing that men followed. And they loved him for it. He had tremendous personal courage under fire. A number of times in history, he gets out in front of his men and he's being fired at. And he doesn't flinch. In one battle, in 1755, this is when the British command was ambushed and almost annihilated. The Virginians that George Washington commanded in 1755, the Battle of the Wilderness, the Virginians saved the day by fighting hand-to-hand with the Indians who had attacked the British column. And so in this hand-to-hand fighting, George Washington had 4 bullet holes through his uniform. Talk about the finger of God, the hand of God protecting him. Not one bullet hit him. In fact, in his whole life, he was never wounded in battle. He believed that God was protecting him. He had a sense of God's protection. So he was never wounded. He had modesty. He was humble. When he accepted the command of the American Army in 1775 against the British, when he accepted that command, he said that he would do his best, and he was honored by this, but he felt there were other men more qualified than him. God bless you as you continue your study of American history.